Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the HOA that wants to have access to my mountain property. I had always been drawn to the mountains. Growing up on stories of rugged landscapes and unspoiled nature, I dreamed of escaping the city hustle to find solace in a cabin tucked away among towering pines and echoing canyons. So, when the opportunity came to purchase a charming, old-fashioned home perched on a gentle slope near a sparkling lake hidden deep in the forest, I didn't hesitate. The property was a real gem, a blend of rustic charm and modern conveniences, and far enough from neighbors that I could enjoy my own quiet paradise. My first months living there were magical. I spent early mornings sipping coffee on the porch while the sunrise painted the horizon in hues of gold and lavender. I explored winding trails, listened to the distant calls of wildlife, and felt as if I had discovered a secret slice of America that was untouched by the chaos of modern life. I even found a dusty journal hidden in the attic of the old house, filled with handwritten notes and sketches by a previous owner who, much like me, had sought refuge in the embrace of nature. Every day was a quiet celebration of freedom, until one crisp autumn morning when the unexpected happened. It began with a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in the middle of the serene morning stillness. I opened the door to find a man in a crisp suit, his expression a blend of stern determination and thinly veiled irritation. "Good morning," he said in a clipped tone. "I'm Derek, from the Homeowners Association." I recalled that the HOA was supposed to manage community improvements and ensure everyone got along in this mountain haven, but I had never met any of the board members in person before. Derek wasted no time. He explained that the association had been in discussions about improving access to the nearby mountain forest lake, a resource that, according to him, was a community amenity. The argument, he said, was that the lake belonged not to any single owner, but to everyone in the neighborhood. His plan, as he explained with the air of someone announcing a new policy, was to establish a dedicated trail across private property to facilitate quick access to the lake during peak recreation hours. I blinked in disbelief. I had purchased this property with clear boundaries outlined in the deed, and the lake, though located in the forest, was something I had assumed lay on public land or was part of a shared trust area managed by the county. When Derek mentioned that the HOA had already started putting up signs on my property, signs that declared my land designated for community access, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My property, my sanctuary, was being besieged by bureaucratic overreach. That same afternoon, I returned home from a brief hike, only to be greeted by a sight that sent my heart racing. A series of brightly colored signs planted along the trail leading from the edge of my driveway to the nearest wooded boundary. Each sign, emblazoned with the HOA logo and cryptic messages like Community Trail Access and Lakeway Gateway, stood as an aggressive claim upon my property. I stared at them in dismay, my mind racing with questions. How had these people thought it acceptable to intrude upon my land without even a formal discussion? I recalled that when I signed the deed for the property, there was a clause about public access in emergency scenarios, strictly to be used for rescue operations, but nothing that remotely suggested routine access for recreational purposes. Immediately, I contacted my lawyer, Marlon, who assured me that under U.S. property law, particularly the strong legal protections afforded to private landowners, the HOA had no right to impose such regulations without unanimous consent from the affected property owners. Before Marlon could complete his detailed analysis, I knew I had to act fast. I called the local police non-emergency line and explained the situation carefully, stating that unauthorized signage and the encroachment onto private property was not only disrespectful, but potentially a legal violation of trespassing laws. The dispatcher promised that an officer would visit my property to document the situation, and I hoped that my actions would put a stop to the HOA's reckless behavior before it spiraled any further. Within an hour, Officer Camden arrived. A seasoned law enforcement veteran with a calm demeanor, he listened intently as I recounted my story. As he walked the property with me, measuring boundaries and examining the signs, Camden explained the basics of trespassing laws and reassured me that any further encroachments could indeed lead to significant legal repercussions for the HOA. Over the next few days, word about the signage spread through the small mountain community. I learned that I wasn't the only one facing unwanted interference. My neighbor, Seth, a quiet man with a fierce sense of justice who had lived on the adjoining property for several decades, confided that he'd been approached by a mysterious representative from the HOA the week before, asking him to sign off on a shared responsibility for maintaining the trail. Seth, who had no interest in disrupting the natural quiet of the area, had firmly declined. Yet he was warned that if he didn't cooperate, compromising decisions might have to be made. This created a ripple of unease among the residents of our small community. Families began questioning whether they should band together to resist the HOA's unwarranted encroachments, but fear of retribution or legal entanglements had them hesitant. I started receiving anonymous letters under my door, some urging me to reconsider my stance, others commending my resolve but warning me to watch my back. At the time, I interpreted these as signs of a brewing internal conflict within the HOA, a clash between its more militant board members and the homeowners who were keen on preserving the peaceful lifestyle they'd worked hard to secure. Determined not to back down, I met with Marlon at a local diner one cool afternoon. He laid out the legal landscape with clarity, referencing property laws and previous cases in which courts had sided with homeowners when faced with unauthorized declarations of public access. "Aaron," he said firmly, "the law is on your side. The HOA cannot by any means force you to provide access without proper legal processes and unanimous consent. Their actions of putting up signs on your property are likely a clear violation, and you could press charges for trespassing and defamation of property rights." Armed with this knowledge, I drafted a stern letter addressed to the HOA board. I outlined the legal missteps they were about to commit, demanded an immediate removal of all signage, and warned of forthcoming legal actions should they continue to act outside the scope of their authority. I sent copies to every homeowner in the community, with the hope that a united front might derail this intrusion. Derek responded only with vague promises of reconsideration and assurances that the signs would be removed if necessary discussions were held. However, his assurances were short-lived. Merely 2 days later, I found a new set of signs, this time even bolder in size and color, strategically positioned along the trail that led not just to the forest edge, but curving directly into the heart of my property. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. It was at that moment I decided to escalate my response. I scheduled a meeting with the local county official, Elise, who oversaw land management in our region. Elise had a reputation for fairness, and I hoped that her intervention might provide a check against the HOA's arbitrary actions. Meeting Elise at her modest office in the local government building was eye-opening. She listened patiently as I detailed the unfolding debacle. With each piece of evidence I presented, a series of dated photographs of the signs, copies of the letter to the HOA board, statements from my neighbor Seth, and even the police report from Officer Camden, it became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident of overreach. Elise explained that while HOAs do have considerable leeway in managing community affairs, their powers are not absolute. She confirmed that the signage was a violation of my property rights, as the trail and lake did not fall under any legally binding communal use designation that was present in the original deed or subsequent county records. Elise warned that if the HOA continued on this path, it might face severe penalties not only from civil litigation, but possibly from county sanctions. More importantly, she took a personal interest in ensuring that the interests of individual property owners, like myself, were protected. We discussed the potential of holding an emergency town hall meeting where affected homeowners could air their grievances and demand accountability from the HOA board. Inspired by Elise's supportive stance, I began to rally the community. Over the span of a couple of weeks, I connected with several homeowners whose properties abutted the disputed area. Among them was Maria, a retired teacher known for her unwavering commitment to civic duty, and Jordan, a tech entrepreneur who had purchased a home in the area to escape the corporate rat race. Each person had their own story of encounters with the HOA's overreach, and collectively, our stories coalesced into a demand for transparency and legal correctness. We organized small gatherings in our backyards and at local cafes, sharing documentation and strategies for legal recourse. It became clear that while the HOA was determined to push through with their plans, they had underestimated the resolve and unity of property owners who refused to relinquish their rights without a fight. Our meetings were peppered with passionate debates about property rights, the sanctity of private space, and the moral obligation of community organizations to respect individual ownership. At one such meeting, Maria recounted her own run-in with an HOA representative who had tried to coerce her into signing an exemption form that she suspected was designed to waive her right to contest any future encroachments. "I've lived on this land long enough to know that my home is my sanctuary," she told the group. "I'm not about to let anyone decide what that means for me." Her words resonated deeply, and a sense of purpose began to burn brightly in all of us. As more homeowners came forward with similar stories, it was apparent that the HOA's actions were part of a broader pattern of overreach. Several letter campaigns, protest signs, and even a petition gathered hundreds of signatures, all demanding that the board step down from its current tactics and engage in legitimate, transparent discussions with property owners. I took it upon myself to document every step, every conversation, every interaction, every piece of correspondence. I knew that meticulous records would be crucial in any legal proceedings that might eventually be forced upon the HOA. Then came the day when I personally confronted Derek once again. I had received a call from him early in the morning, asking if I could meet him at a neutral location, a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Sensing that this might be an attempt at a one-sided negotiation, I agreed, making sure to have my phone on record and a friend with me for moral support. At the coffee shop, Derek arrived with a nervous energy that belied his earlier confident posture. He tried to downplay the significance of the signage, suggesting that it was merely a temporary measure until a formal plan could be discussed. I questioned him sharply about the legality of his actions and his authority to enforce community access across privately owned land. After several minutes of tense back and forth, it was clear that Derek was struggling to provide any substantial justification. When pressed further, he muttered something about community safety and preserving the natural beauty for all, but his eyes darted around the room as if anticipating repercussions. I left that meeting with a clear message: their approach would no longer be tolerated. That very afternoon, I contacted my lawyer Marlon and updated him on the latest development. Marlon reassured me that I had every right to demand immediate removal of the signage and warned that any further incursion could be documented as evidence of criminal trespassing or even property vandalism. I also notified Officer Camden of the meeting's outcome, which only served to underscore the imminent consequences if the HOA persisted. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more convoluted, an entirely new complication emerged. A few days after my meeting with Derek, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a neatly typed notice from an unknown sender who introduced himself as Crispin, a name I would later learn belonged to a security consultant hired independently by a group of property owners dissatisfied with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Crispin's letter outlined an alternative plan. Instead of forcing a controversial trail on private property, why not develop a mutually agreed-upon access route that would benefit everyone without infringing on individual rights? He proposed a series of community meetings to develop a comprehensive, legally binding agreement that protected both the property of individual homeowners and the collective interest in preserving the mountain forest lake as a recreational asset. Though the idea seemed reasonable and even progressive, I was cautious. Could this be a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or just another tactic to distract from the HOA's aggressive maneuvers? After much deliberation with my newfound allies, Seth, Maria, Jordan, and several others, I decided to attend one of the meetings organized by Crispin. Held in a modest community center on the outskirts of our mountain enclave, the gathering was small but spirited. Crispin spoke passionately about the need for genuine cooperation and respect for established legal boundaries. He backed his proposal with clear references to local zoning laws and cases where courts had upheld the property rights of individuals against communal pressures. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps there was a way out of this quagmire without descending into a full-scale legal battle that could tear the community apart. In that meeting, voices were raised, not in anger but in a shared commitment to protecting what was rightfully theirs. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a significant step forward in rallying community support against unilateral decisions that undermined our rights. Following the meeting, I returned to my home with a cautious optimism and a strengthened resolve. I spent the next few days meticulously scanning through old property records and county documents, determined to gather every scrap of evidence that would prove my land boundaries were inviolable. I even revisited the attic of my home and found additional clues in the previous owner's journal. notes that clearly demarcated the historical boundaries of the property and outlined the original vision for its use. Armed with these documents, I arranged a follow-up meeting with Elise, the county official. This time, the discussion was technical and rooted in details of property law. Elise confirmed that the HOA had no legal standing to impose public access on my land without first obtaining clear, unanimous consent from all affected property owners and going through the proper channels. She recommended that I submit a formal complaint to the county and assured me that an investigation would be launched immediately. The firm backing of local government added both legitimacy and pressure on the HOA's flimsy justifications. Yet, even as the county began its review, the HOA's tactics escalated. Just as I thought I had a victory in the bag, I noticed one evening, while returning from a local supply run, that a small group of individuals had gathered near the woodland trail. They weren't wearing uniforms or any identifiable clothing. Rather, they were ordinary people, some in work boots, others in casual outdoor attire, yet each carried a sense of purpose that was hard to ignore. Their mission? To remove the signs themselves, a silent protest against what they saw as an affront to their freedom of choice on how to use the natural resources that surrounded our community. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Was this simply an act of civil disobedience, or had matters taken a dangerous turn? I decided not to intervene immediately, though I recorded the scene with my phone from a discreet distance. The potential for further escalation was real, and I wasn't ready for anarchy on my doorstep, even if it was well-intentioned. The turning point came on a particularly chilly morning when, after a night of heavy rain, the entire community was abuzz with rumors that the HOA was planning a large-scale reassessment of access rights. That morning, I awoke to find my front yard littered with freshly painted markers demarcating not only what the HOA claimed as a designated trail, but also outlining a so-called community corridor stretching across my property toward the lake. This act was more than a mere statement. It was a blatant, provocative infringement on my legally defined boundaries. Fueled by a mixture of exasperation and indignation, I immediately contacted Officer Camden once more. Together, we documented the markers, noted their exact positions with reference to my land surveys, and took extensive photographs. Camden advised that with the evidence in hand, I had every right to insist on their immediate removal by law enforcement if necessary. That same afternoon, the local police station sent a patrol officer to remove the markers, a small but significant victory that temporarily stalled the HOA's invasive campaign. However, the victory came at a cost. The police report noted that I had approached the scene with heightened emotions, and while I was not cited for any offense, the note suggested that any further incidents might be viewed through a more critical lens. The threat of potential escalation from law enforcement, when combined with the HOA's relentless persistence, set the stage for an inevitable showdown. In the days following the marker removal, the sense of collective resolve among our community members solidified. It was as if the outrage had bonded us together, and soon we were holding an impromptu town hall meeting under the large oak tree near the Central Park area. Neighbors from all corners of our mountain enclave gathered, each with stories of subtle or overt encroachments by the HOA. The discussion was vigorous, filled with both anger and a determination to protect our rights. Seth, whose quiet demeanor belied a fervent commitment to justice, suggested that we not only lodge formal complaints, but also prepare for the possibility of a class action lawsuit if the HOA persisted. Maria, always the voice of wisdom, reminded everyone to keep our actions within the bounds of the law so as not to give our adversaries any reason to discredit our grievances. Jordan, whose background in technology had him adept at data collection, offered to set up an online repository where every affected homeowner could upload documents, photographs, and statements to build an irrefutable case. Even as we strategized, whispers of discontent and fear managed to seep into some corners of our gathering. A small faction argued that perhaps we should consider compromise, that a negotiated agreement might benefit everyone in the long run. But for many of us, including myself, the principle of private ownership was not up for sale. The mountain had always been a retreat, a sacred space where personal freedom reigned supreme, and letting it be compromised by bureaucratic overreach was simply unconscionable. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the high peaks and bathed the valley in a soft amber glow, I found myself reflecting on all that had transpired. I sat on my back porch, a cup of tea in hand, and thought of the ways in which the human spirit must sometimes stand against the tide, especially when the tide is fed by those who would sacrifice individual rights on the altar of supposed community good. Armed with mounting evidence and spurred on by the community's backing, I finally took the matter to court. In a legal battle that spanned several weeks, Marlon and I presented our case with unwavering clarity, citing historical property records, county inspection reports, and even audio recordings from our community meetings. The courtroom was filled with tension as the HOA's legal team attempted to muddy the waters by invoking ambiguous notions of shared community benefits and the greater good. The turning point in the legal proceedings came when Elise, the county official, was called to testify. In a manner that was both articulate and decisive, she confirmed that the HOA had acted outside of its lawful authority from the very beginning. Her testimony was bolstered by reference to local ordinances and federal guidelines protecting private property. The presiding judge listened carefully, nodding as she laid out the legal framework that clearly protected individual land ownership against such unilateral decisions. When the verdict was finally handed down, it was a resounding victory for those of us who believed in personal rights. The court ordered the HOA to immediately cease all activities on my property and to remove any signage or markers that had been installed. More importantly, the judge mandated that the HOA board undergo a thorough review of its practices. As part of the judgment, the board members responsible for the unauthorized actions were fined heavily and required to attend community mediation sessions aimed at rebuilding trust between the association and homeowners. Although the legal battle had been exhausting, the ruling felt like a vindication of everything I had stood for. I received an outpouring of support from within our small community, not just from those directly affected by the signage, but from others who had seen the HOA's long history of overreach. In a display of true community spirit, several previously reticent homeowners stepped forward to share their own experiences of being ignored or manipulated by the HOA. In one particular instance, a longtime resident named Caleb, known for his calm demeanor and quiet persistence, revealed that he had been denied permission to renovate his home's exterior under some preposterous aesthetic guidelines imposed by the board. The case was minor on its own, but in the context of our collective struggle, it underscored a fundamental truth. When individual rights are trampled upon, even small actions by a governing body can have ripple effects across an entire community. Feeling emboldened by our legal victory and the strength of our bonds, I led the charge in organizing a series of community workshops on property rights and local governance. These workshops brought in legal experts, county officials, and community activists to educate homeowners on how to safeguard their property without descending into bitterness. The sessions were filled with personal testimonies, empowering everyone with the knowledge that they were not powerless against bureaucratic overreach. During one such workshop, I found myself standing before a group of earnest neighbors, explaining in detail the legal rationale behind the court's ruling. I stressed that property ownership in this country is not a privilege to be arbitrarily revoked, but a right protected by a robust legal system. I reminded everyone that it was our collective duty to hold organizations accountable when they stepped beyond their mandate, and that while compromise was always preferable, it should never come at the expense of fundamental rights. In the weeks and months that followed, our community began to transform. The HOA, embarrassed by its public defeat, and now under intense scrutiny from local government and the press, was forced to make sweeping changes. Several board members resigned, and a new board was elected, one composed primarily of homeowners who were committed to transparent democratic processes. The once intimidating organization was now reformed and took deliberate steps to rebuild trust with the community. I continued to receive messages of thanks from neighbors, many of whom said that my insistence on defending my property had inspired them to stand up for their own rights. There were heartfelt letters, small tokens of gratitude left on my doorstep, and even invitations to speak at other community gatherings across the region. Despite all the adversity, my home remained a sanctuary, a place where I was free to live as I saw fit, with the assurance that my rights had been upheld. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I realized that the struggle had not only been about protecting a single parcel of land, it was about preserving a way of life. In the age of sprawling bureaucracies and impersonal regulations, our success was a reminder that individual citizens, when united in purpose, could challenge the powerful and emerge victorious. It was a lesson in resilience, a testament to the enduring spirit of community, and a clear signal to any organization that oversteps its bounds: we will defend what is rightfully ours. It wasn't long before life began to settle back into a semblance of normalcy. I resumed my solitary morning walks, savoring the quiet and the rustling of leaves underfoot, and often found myself pausing near the trail where the signs once stood as a grim reminder of an overreach. Now, in that cleared space, nature reclaimed its rightful place, and the disturbance became nothing more than a memory, albeit one that had fortified my commitment to preserving personal liberties. Every time I looked out from my back porch at sunset, I was reminded of the delicate balance between community and individuality. It was a balance that, when properly respected, could allow both a sense of belonging and a strong protection of one's own rights. The legal victory had not only repelled the unwanted encroachment, but had sparked a broader conversation about the limits of authority and the importance of self-determination. In a quiet moment, I thought about how a single act of defiance, a simple call to the police that afternoon, had cascaded into a much larger movement. I had always believed that owning property was more than just possession of land. It was about the freedom to shape one's own destiny. I realized that while the battle had been bitter, it had also united us in ways that transcended individual disputes. We were a community reborn, with a shared vision of fairness and respect for one another's private spaces. As the seasons changed, I even found opportunities to turn my experience into something positive for others. I started volunteering with a local group dedicated to educating new homeowners about their rights, ensuring that no one else would have to endure a similar struggle. The impact was profound. Neighbors who had once felt powerless now spoke confidently about legal statutes and property rights, and that collective empowerment radiated far beyond the mountain trails. Not all who were initially part of the controversy were adversaries for long. Over time, even some of the former HOA board members began to see the error of their ways. Derek, the representative who had first knocked on my door with that unsettling mix of authority and menace, eventually approached me with an olive branch. He admitted that, in hindsight, the measures taken by the board were hasty and ill-considered. He expressed a genuine desire to make amends and help restructure the HOA into an organization that truly respected the legal rights of its members. I agreed to have a conversation, one recorded and formally witnessed by a community mediator. In that meeting, Derek expressed remorse for the way the signage had been imposed and explained that he had been following directives from higher up in the organization. Although my trust was not instantly restored, the conversation marked the beginning of a slow but steady change. Over the following months, Derek participated in several community forums, offering insights into the decision-making processes of the HOA and advocating for stricter oversight measures. While he could not undo the actions of the past, his public accountability served as a form of punishment for those who had blatantly violated the rights of the homeowners and paved the way for a more transparent future. Another unexpected twist came when the local news caught wind of our battle. A small investigative report highlighted our struggle against an overreaching HOA and showcased the collective resolve of a community that refused to be steamrolled by corporate interests. The story, though gently framed, carried an underlying message about the sanctity of private property and the importance of local governance. The report resonated with countless viewers, some of whom reached out with their own stories of bureaucratic overreach. In this way, our personal struggle became part of a broader dialogue about citizens' rights in a modern America. Now, several months after the legal victory, I sit here in my mountain home reflecting on how that tumultuous period transformed not just my property, but my entire outlook on life. I have become more involved in local governance, more educated about the intricacies of property law, and more passionate about ensuring that every individual has the tools to protect their own sanctuary. My once quiet existence had been shattered by external forces, but in its place grew a determined community ready to stand together against any infringement on our freedoms. Looking back, the ordeal was a profound lesson in the importance of vigilance, unity, and the willingness to stand up for one's rights, even when it means challenging institutions that many would accept without question. My property is not just a piece of land. It's a testament to the enduring values of freedom and self-determination, and a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the voice of a determined individual can ignite the spark of change. As the HOA board continues its process of internal reform, and the new board champions a more responsible, inclusive approach to community management, I find solace in knowing that our victory, though fought at great personal expense, secured not only my property rights but the integrity of our entire mountain community. The ripples from our success have spread further than I could ever have anticipated, reaching neighbors and even inspiring other small communities across the region to reassess their own rights and responsibilities. This entire experience has left an indelible mark on me. I now find comfort in the sound of rustling leaves, the crisp air of the mountains, and the newfound camaraderie among neighbors who once shared only casual greetings. Every day I am reminded that standing up for what is right, no matter how overwhelming the opposition, can lead to meaningful, lasting change. Through persistence, cooperation, and a steadfast belief in the principles of American property rights, we turned an act of intrusion into a powerful lesson in community and accountability. In the end, the punishment meted out to those in the HOA responsible for blatantly violating our rights was not merely a matter of fines or legal censure, it was a moral reckoning. Our unified stand forced the organization to confront its own biases and overextensions, ultimately reshaping it into a body that respects the sanctity of individual ownership. And while there are scars left from the battle, each one is a reminder of a hard-won victory that ensured my mountain home and every other home in our enclave remained a fortress of personal freedom. Friends, thank you. See you soon.